A home. It's something we all need. But for too many, having a safe place to make a home is out of reach. The challenges can seem insurmountable. And yet, each and every day, people are coming together to provide safe, quality, and affordable housing for those in need. Welcome to Let's Talk Housing. I'm your host, Meeta Naidu. Join us as we listen to and learn from people in British Columbia who are creating strong, inclusive communities where everyone can thrive.
Hello there. My name is Jennifer Breakspear, and I'm an Associate Vice President with BC Housing, and I identify as a out queer woman with pronouns she, her. Today on Let's Talk Housing, we're joined by Ryan Bruyn, a non-binary individual who's a resident support worker at McLaren Housing Society, as well as Sekani Dakelth from the Dakelth Nation, and a facilitator and consultant with the First Nations Health Authority in the City of Vancouver. We're also joined by BC Housing's very own technology programs coordinator, Samantha Dray. They will all be sharing their personal stories about how the 2SLGBTQIA plus community is impacted by housing access. As we begin, I want to respectfully acknowledge that we're recording from the territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. And for transparency, this episode is being recorded in April 2025 and reflects the issues and priorities of that time. Welcome to Let's Talk Housing. Welcome, Sekani, Samantha, and Ryan. I'm glad to have you with us on Let's Talk Housing. How about we start with you, Ryan? Would you like to share your pronouns, introduce yourself to the audience, as well as tell us a bit about McLaren Housing and what role you and the organization have in the housing sector?
Of course. So my name is Ryan Bruyn. I use they, them pronouns. I'm a resident support worker at McLaren Housing Society of BC. McLaren Housing Society is an organization that offers supportive and subsidized housing for individuals living with HIV. We currently right now have 110 units that are supportive housing units, and we have 31 units that are subsidized. We also offer a portable subsidy program, which essentially offsets market rent. My role is at the supportive housing apartment building, and it's resident support worker. Essentially, I'm working on wellness goals, working with folks to keep their housing secure, maintain their housing. I also see it as kind of like a bridge of sorts. So people will come and meet with me. And then through that connection, I'm able to connect them to outside services and supports. And I spend a lot of my time creating the programming that we have at our supportive housing location.
Thanks, Ryan. All very important work. I'll turn to Samantha now and ask if you'd like to share your pronouns, a bit about yourself, and tell us what you do here at BC Housing.
Yeah, definitely. Morning, everybody. I identify she, her pronouns, a proudly out lesbian, and BC Housing. Yeah, I'll try and keep it short and sweet, but I help housing providers that are partnered with BC Housing by any level of subsidy learn about technology. There is a gap in digital, literacy and easy tips and tricks when your main goals are to find people housing. Using Outlook to the best of your ability is not your number one priority. So we kind of help by providing resources, training, templates with the help of the VP of IMT, Mike Klein. We do get hit in nonprofit with phishing scams, malware, things like that. So just sort of an awareness and resource for those nonprofit housing providers.
Thanks, Samantha. Happy to have you with us. And Sekani, would you like to share your pronouns, tell us a bit about your background, as well as the work you've been involved in regarding housing for the 2S trans community?
Hi, everyone. My name is Sekani Dakelth. I'm from the Dakelth Nation, like they mentioned. I go by she, her pronouns. I am also a very proud trans woman. I kind of more lean toward the two-spirited now. I feel like that's more where I identify better with. So currently right now I'm working with specifically around 2S housing. My contract just ended and I was working with a roundtable that matched paired service providers with community members of the trans and gender diverse and two-spirited community. And we talked about their living experience around housing and about service gaps and how service providers and housing providers can kind of meet those service gaps. And then always consulting with my own nation. I'm always showing up at like our band member meetings and pressing for housing, like for everyone. I feel like a lot of people need housing. Like I have a big family. So there's like 10 of us. There's 10 of us that live in this current house, and I'm the only trans two-spirited person in the house. But I mean, like everybody, we all need housing in this place. I feel like that's kind of a lot of people need housing. I work with harm reduction and I facilitate workshops. I facilitate a space where facilitators get to talk about how they're talking about harm reduction in their communities and where we can kind of support each other at. But the roundtable is like where we talk about housing, and it's focused on trans and gender diverse and two-spirited, with a huge like representation from the two-spirited community.
And with that, I would imagine a number of Indigenous folks from different nations. Would that be correct?
Yeah, everyone, actually, the Indigenous people that are on the roundtable, both on the service provider end and on the community member, our community consultants level, are all from different nations.
Okay, I would love to hear more about that as we move through Sekani, particularly around supporting two-spirited folks. That's great. Samantha, if I could turn to you now, can you share a bit about your journey of searching for safe and secure housing?
Yeah, definitely. So for most of my time here living in Lower Mainland in Vancouver, I came from Calgary. I was living with a partner. So the finding housing, safe and secure, it was not easy. I've seen other friends have those issues. Finding housing with a partner and having a conventionally looking partnership, was easy to find. The housing itself, but maybe afterwards, which I will go into later, was a little more difficult.
Thanks for that. I'd like to go to you next, Sekani, if you could, because I just want to pick up. You were talking about so many people living in your house, and you're all in need of housing. So, can you tell us about that journey for safe and secure housing?
Where do I start? I have a lot of experience around housing. Obviously, I feel like everybody kind of does. My journey searching for safe and secure housing started, I guess, a long time ago. I became homeless very young at 17. Air quote. I use this term loosely, but I made a choice to leave home. And when I left home, I was taken care of by a friend, and couldn't stay there anymore. Ended up homeless. Didn't really know what to do. At 18, I found that I couldn't. They call it a gray area to be in, and I couldn't really receive services from either ministry, from the MCFD or from social assistance, because I was 18. I couldn't rent a place because of my age. I did find some really amazing services in the Granville area. There were youth shelters that I was able to access, which is amazing. Lived in an SRO for a while, and from there, my first ever place that I felt like really, really understood me was living in supportive housing. And I lived in a supportive housing that was very low barrier, that had harm reduction supplies at the front door, and it had support staff at the front door. And I actually felt like safe there, and I felt like they understood me, and I felt I could be as difficult and as wild as I want there. And I felt like they took care of me, and it was a nice place to be at. And from that place moved into a building. It was a brand new building. It was called the Lux. But it used to be an old theater, I take it. I think it used to be an old theater on Hastings, but it was an amazing space. Like, again, felt safe, huge building, had tons of support staff, had groups. I got a brand new little bachelorette suite, and it was just an amazing place. And then moved in with family, and family, I feel like to me and to our nation, like traditionally we would be living with our whole clan, and we would be living with extended family up to my great grandparents. And we lived that way because we knew that as people age, we need to take care of them and they need a little bit more support. And right now my parents are at getting to that stage, and they're in their 70s, and we definitely step up and we do whatever we can, and they do whatever they can too. They help, rear the kids. So it's safe, it's secure. We feel good here. We each have our own rooms. We have a big back and front yard. It's just like the part that feels like that a bit precarious is probably the cost, and then the longevity of us staying here.
And now I'd like to turn to you, Ryan, and ask if you would like to share, some of your journey around safe and secure housing.
Yeah, so I think safety and security are often compromised by affordability. And right now, the competition for affordability is very high. And so you also need to have these soft skills of like networking and communication skills to really be able to seal in agreements with landlords, which was not necessarily something that people had to navigate 5 years ago. So it's kind of this new requirement. There's high competition. And through that, you're kind of dependent on what the landlord believes to be true. I think right now, being gender diverse is we're in a sticky situation politically. A lot of our lives and ways of being are being politicized. And so you're kind of left to the whims of like where somebody's biases are, if you're not excelling in all other kind of aspects of what would be called a desirable tenant.
Yeah, I picked up on one thing you said right at the beginning there, Ryan, when you said safety and security are often compromised by affordability. And I think you've summed it up. You kind of got the podcast right there. Right?
Yeah,
For
it's
yeah, for any of us to feel safe and secure in our housing, it's also got to be housing we can afford.
mhm.
And that is such a challenge. Maybe I'll stay with you for now, Ryan, and just ask, you've alluded to it, but what sort of unique issues have you faced when navigating the housing system?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I've been pretty fortunate. I think the thing that's the most struggle is just you within the budget that you have, the compromises that you make don't necessarily bring like security of tenure. So you find yourself in situations that maybe aren't a full lease or like kind of these backdoor deals, or you think you're renting, but you're subletting. And so all of a sudden, you don't necessarily have the security of a lease agreement, which can make your housing very precarious and get yourself into situations. Now, the way to combat that is to kind of know your rights as a renter and as a tenant. And I'm very thankful that I work in housing. And so part of my job has given me a lot of opportunity that benefits my own renting and like navigating the housing system.
Sekani, if I can turn back to you, you have talked about some of the issues, and one you referenced being homeless at 17, which I wish I could say is a more rare issue for queer and trans and two-spirited individuals, but unfortunately it's far too common when young queer, trans, two-spirited folks come out that they end up either choosing to leave their home, their family of origin, or are forced out. And I don't know if you want to speak to that specifically, but I just wanted to make sure that we reference how unfortunately common that is for young people in our community.
I guess to put it like in a way that is, even though it was my first time homeless, it was my first time actually finding my community and actually feeling like I fit in, which like is both like it was amazing for me socially, but it was also really tragic because a lot of the people that I did meet were all young. Some people were as young as 14. Most of the people that I met like on the Granville Strip area, I can speak about at that time, 1999. You know, I don't know if it's changed much. I'm not very, I don't talk to a lot of people, and I don't work with a lot of people that are currently on the street there. But everybody was queer or on that spectrum of exploring their identity. And all of my friends were Indigenous. We didn't have there weren't very many options, you know, in 1999, 2000 for a trans, Indigenous, homeless, you know, teenager. There weren't very many options that I could go to. Often, you know, relying on leaning more on my birth gender, you know, to access jobs or to access housing. But yeah, definitely having to make some compromises, I guess, you know, and I, again, use that term loosely because, you know, when you have to compromise, I always found that, you know, the minute that I started being proud and identifying as a trans woman and being two-spirited and saying it proudly and not being, not holding that part of myself back, that it cost me so much that I am not willing to go back there, you know, and to have to compromise, you know, freedom is not something that people should have to choose.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, when you said there that you know you said it as a compromising, but really denying who you are by leaning back into the gender you were assigned at birth to be able to access opportunity. I mean, that's soul stifling. I'm so sorry for that.
I learned so much amazing skills from my life. And that's, you know, my heart is always, I've been working in and around the downtown east side for since I was 30 years old. So I'm 43 now. So 13 years working in the community that I say it's my home, and I say it's where I grew up, working in the community that raised me.
Thanks, Sekani. Samantha, if I can turn to you, and I think you referenced said we might come back to this. If you could tell us a bit about the kind of treatment you experienced as being in a lesbian couple when you were dealing with, I don't know, things like maintenance and other issues in private market housing, and then what advantages did you notice in seeking housing with a partner versus seeking housing as a single woman?
Yeah, definitely. So the first part of that, I think, is sort of, yeah, during a tenancy and during the exiting of a tenancy, being two females, and again, the way I present, but internally, like, I'm the one that unclogs the sinks. I replace parts on my own car. I cycle a lot, and I try and like I my father had two daughters, and I was taught everything in the garage, sort of thing. But the assumption is I don't know anything. So for yeah, maintenance during tenancies, if there's something going on, it was sort of the landlords that renting from, which now I'm thinking back are mostly all male identifying and presenting, but would sort of give different quotes, or sort of push aside my extreme concerns, or things like that. And then when leaving a tenancy and trying to get that lovely security deposit back, trying to sort of strong arm, oh, this is bad, you did this and it's going to cost $500 to replace, and things like that. And knowing my rights, I'm just that person. I've you know at some points, line for line with the Residential Tenancy Act, just for my own, I think everyone unfortunately should know that. Even landlords should read it, to know what they can't push on to their tenants. But yeah, just knowing my own rights, and which, I mean, takes time and takes effort, and it's a lot of reading. It's a lot of, it's not as accessible as maybe it should be, for when you have those situations where, assumptions are made that I don't know anything, from housing. I get that. Like, mechanics, I get that attitude too. I don't know anything, and stuff like that. That's more of the female presenting side of me, but that's frustrating, and sometimes can ruin that relationship with a landlord when you're supposed to be getting another housing that depends on this opinion of the previous landlord. So, can kind of make a mess there. But that's an experience that I've had time and time again living, as two female partners.
I'd like to move on to talk about the Burrard and Davy Community Project. And I'm just going to throw in a personal little connection to this because I was the executive director of community for a number of years. And in fact, was involved in having the first conversations with the city of Vancouver, which eventually, a few executive directors later and years go by, has led to this exciting project. So it's a site in development that will be operated with a queer mandate and will be operated by McLaren Housing Society. It's a larger housing site that will accommodate multi-generational chosen families, which I just think is awesome. So, Ryan, you're with McLaren. Can you tell us more about what's meant there exactly about a queer mandate and really why that's important?
I can. Just to clarify though, McLaren Housing won't be running the whole building, but we have partnered with Community Land Trust, who's going to be running that building. We're going to be operating and offering our services to the 31 allocated subsidized apartments that will be there. And so we have our own mandate that is not as homogenous, right? Like it is housing folks who are living with HIV. And so we will stick to our mandate and house folks living with HIV. That being said, there is overlap.
Awesome. Awesome. So, Ryan, I wonder if you can share how you think having those 2SLGBTQ plus services right on site will benefit both the residents in the building and, nearby community.
Yeah. I'm so excited to see it. I feel like it is going to inject that area with community and belonging in a way that just has kind of been missing for a little bit. It's so important for queer people to have access to queer tailored care. The fact that community is going to be there and they're going to be building up these programs that are tailored and geared towards queer people is just life changing because a lot of us have to navigate systems that weren't necessarily built for us, or they don't necessarily know what is kind of like common behavior in queer communities. So to have that tailored care is really is the grounding stones to build a community back up in Davie Street.
Samantha, I'm going to shift gears here and ask if you'd like to talk about the beneficial role that you see technology can play in the queer community in relation to housing and community building.
With all of us being connected through the internet, all these things, taking advantage of social media can be a definitely huge part. Certain groups you can go to check if a neighborhood is safe, if there is community there. Pick a neighborhood in Vancouver, Mount Pleasant, queer, and search and see if there's any private groups on various social media platforms. Neighborhood app. There's the neighborhood app, which is you're connected to your postal code and near you and things like that, and just sort of honestly just reading through comments, reading through what neighborhood neighbors are concerned about, or just taking a walk as well, maybe not technology related, but taking a walk in those neighborhoods, find out where they are, go hang out, see what flags are up in the balconies and stuff like that. But yeah, social media platforms can be huge in that way, or go old school Craigslist, check out some forums on there and good old Reddit. I think that because we are connected, people like to talk. I think after the pandemic we're even more on the internet, having I won't say conversations, but putting our opinions out there. So, having that, and just, yeah, like if you are involved in a community thing, with any of the queer community, get those connections, network, LinkedIn, these conversations. I'd love to add you all on LinkedIn after, things like that. Just staying connected, in that, social media space.
My wife and I moved to Vancouver 20 years ago from Ontario and Quebec. And so that predated a lot of the social media stuff. But there was this one resource we found. I think it was like a message board. It was called Super Dyke. I don't know if Super Dyke still operates, but it was my memory is it was a very basic message board. There'd be a subject, there'd be, a post and then some comments. But as new people to Vancouver, it was like, seems Vancouver based. This seems to be about our community. We can ask questions of somebody. So it was a resource, even in its very rudimentary early social media type of times. Sekani, again, shifting gears here, you referenced family and chosen family. So I'm wondering what role you've seen chosen family play in creating an environment in which folks can thrive.
Goodness, chosen family, a lot of like mentioning about homelessness and meeting a lot of people that I identified with when I was growing up. A lot of us were estranged from our community and our families. We didn't have a lot of family, so we would adopt each other, and there was this kind of family system on the street, and you often we called it a street mother, and that was somebody who would kind of take you under their wing and kind of teach you how to be to keep yourself safe and how to navigate resources and services, and kind of show you, I guess, the ropes of how to really maintain yourself in the community. They were so important to like sharing about that safety and that security, and showing me where to get food, showing me which is a good place to buy shoes, a good place to shop that's really accepting of trans and two-spirited people. And those things are really important to me because, I didn't want to shop at somewhere that didn't want my business, because I wasn't going to be welcomed. And I didn't have a lot of fight in me back then. I didn't want to have to fight to shop somewhere. I wanted to get some shoes, I wanted a dress, and I wanted to continue on. And, the chosen family was able to show me those spaces, and having them, stay with me and live with me potentially is really important, because I understand how hard it is for one person to afford one space. I feel like it's a very precarious situation, and having, a lot of places have very tight rules on what family means. I know that, like, in general, you're allowed to have family stay with you for 2 weeks, or you're allowed to have a guest for 2 weeks, and you could have a family member stay with you longer. And oftentimes that definition of what a family member is very confined and stringent, and it doesn't account for my street mom, who actually raised me, better than I shouldn't say that, because I love my mom and I live with my mom now, and, we have a good relationship now, but it wasn't always like that. And my street mom took such good care of me and means so much to me.
Ryan, can you talk about how food, creativity, hobbies, and programs, the amenities in a building can help foster a healthy community for 2SLGBTQIA plus people?
One of my favorite things to say is food is community. Nourishment is community. And so when we're looking at developing programming, we're looking at what is nourishing not only the body, but also our emotional body. We're having increasing research come out that says that isolation and loneliness takes years off of life expectancy. And so, how do we create these programs in a building that help kind of combat that, knowing that it is, in fact, like a social cultural issue more than medical? I find food opens the pathways for connection. It brings people in to have those conversations and makes those connections. And then being able to create programming where people contribute, that starts to build belonging and community. People need to contribute to it to feel part of it.
Sekani, what role do you see those important elements having in the building of a sense of family and community for 2S trans folks?
Family, I feel like food is such a big part of so many cultures, and like it's one of those things that is actually a basic need, and when you bring people together with food, my favorite place to go would be a community kitchen, and I loved it because I got to see all of the people that lived in my community, and we got to cook together, and we got to share stories, and we got to identify with each other. And, when you're able to like look at our neighbor and see the human in them, we're able to really start having compassion, and that really leads to empathy, and just caring for one another is so important to a community, and to how healthy a community is. And the program is just like the cherry on the topping of all that delicious goodness from the food.
I love the way you said that. I can almost taste it. That's great. Well, we're coming close to wrapping up, so I'd like to put a question to each of you. If you can share, based on your own story and experiences, what gives you hope for the future? And remember, we're talking sort of with a housing emphasis. What gives you hope for the future for two-spirit, trans, non-binary, and queer folks? Sekani, how about we go to you?
What gives me hope for the future of housing is just continuing that engagement, expanding that engagement to kind of have a include everybody conversation. So having everyone with a seat at the table, and earlier I mentioned big wigs, right? We're going to put on our big wigs and we're all going to sit at the table together and figure this out. Really focusing in on those conversations around what it means to age in place in the community is going to be really important for the future. Talking about, we talk about building the community, and we talk about eating together and really tightening up that community. But when somebody ages, often they're usually, their option is to leave all that work. We've 10 years of bonding that we've all facilitated and created, and now we're going to ask them to leave. I think that is not an option. I don't think that should be an option. I think that when we look at planning for housing, that's part of the conversation. Okay, can we modify an existing suite, right? What does that look like for our end? What does that look like for our engineers? Having our engineers at the table put on their big wigs too and come sit at the table with us and talk about what does that look like for the future.
That's awesome. And that engagement, it goes back to what we so often would say at protests and rallies, nothing about us without us. And there's a piece in what you're saying, Sekani, that I want to come back to as I close out. But I want to go next to Samantha and then give Ryan the last word about what you see as future. Where are your hopes for the future? Where do you see wins for our community in regards to housing? So over to you, Samantha.
Definitely, what gives me hope and where I can see is I kind of echo what Kenny was saying, just staying engaged, having those open conversations, in my community in Vancouver, things like that. There's a lot of spaces that shut down expansions and progression of housing for anyone, let alone, any members of the 2SLGBTQ community. And just, yeah, staying engaged, obviously there's touchy subjects. We can all get, quite upset. It is, lots of language is offensive, lots of assumptions are offensive, things like that. But just staying engaged and open-minded and keep those conversations at the forefront. There's huge intersectional issues that come with this, Indigenous folks, queer, all of it you know, there's nothing, as Jennifer said, nothing should be for us without us. We should be involved in these conversations. And just making sure, when you can and you feel safe, advocating for those whose voices are normally shut down. And that's something that, me personally, I do. And I hope that more and more of those who do have this visual advantage sometimes do that. I'm very loud and can get my point across, and I feel safe to do that. So I do that for those that stand beside me and can't, because of their own safety.
Ryan, I'm going to give you the last word on where you see hope for the future.
I think being able to kind of choose the community that you live in also fosters that community instead of just being placed somewhere because it was available. And so that brings me a lot of excitement. to just think that we would be able to, again, create communities through dignity of choice. Our strength is in our diversity, and I have hope in the choices that are coming up. Every time you walk out the door, you see apartment buildings being made. I mean, to me, this is hopeful. We're visibly seeing growth, and it gives me hope that there's going to be choice of where we can live, where we can build community, and I'm excited to see it.
If I can, I want to throw in somewhere I see hope for our community's future is in the fact that because we had to fight so hard for so many things, we know how to get active. We know how to organize. We know how to engage with people and get our point across. And dagnabbit, if we're going to have to do that as we get older, we're going to do it because you don't keep a bunch of old queers down. Thanks, everybody. It's really been a joy to talk with you today about housing and queer communities and challenges and opportunities for all of us. Thank you so much for joining the show and being with us here on Let's Talk Housing.
To learn more about BC Housing, including how to apply for subsidized housing in British Columbia, visit www.bchousing.org. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and X. If you enjoyed this episode, give us a rating. This will help others find Let's Talk Housing and join the conversation. You can subscribe to Let's Talk Housing on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts.